The fluorescent lights of Dallas-Fort Worth Airport buzzed overhead as I stood in line at the check-in counter, my worn leather briefcase clutched tightly in my sweaty palm. The morning rush was in full swing, and travelers pushed past me with their expensive luggage and confident strides. I had been working at Morrison & Associates marketing for 3 years, and this was my first time traveling for business. My stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Next. The airline representative called out, and I stepped forward with my printed boarding pass and ID. Behind me, I could hear the familiar booming voice of my boss, Richard Morrison. He was the kind of man who commanded attention wherever he went, tall, silver-haired, always wearing suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His laugh echoed through the terminal as he chatted with clients, the sound sharp and condescending. "Economy class to Chicago," I said to the representative, sliding my documents across the counter. The woman, whose name tag read Patricia, gave me a warm smile as she scanned my information. "Of course. Let me just check on some things for you, Mr. Thompson," she said, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. I noticed her eyebrows raise slightly as she looked at her screen, but she continued typing without comment. That's when I heard Richard's voice behind me, louder now and clearly directed my way. Well. Look who's flying with the big boys now." His tone dripped with sarcasm. I turned around to see him approaching with his usual entourage, 2 junior executives who laughed at his every word and nodded along to whatever opinion he expressed. "First business trip, isn't it, Thompson?" "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm excited about the opportunity to present our campaign to the Chicago client." Richard let out that sharp laugh again. "Oh, you're presenting, are you? That's rich." He turned to his companions with exaggerated amusement. "Did you hear that, gentlemen? Our little intern here thinks he's presenting to Midwest Industries. Actually, sir, I've been with the company for 3 years now and—" "3 years of filing papers and fetching coffee," Richard interrupted, his voice growing louder. Other travelers were beginning to stare, and I felt heat creeping up my neck. "Let me make something crystal clear, Thompson. You're going to Chicago to observe. To learn. To sit quietly in the corner and maybe if you're lucky you'll pick up something useful." Patricia behind the counter had stopped typing and was watching the exchange with obvious discomfort. I wanted to disappear into the floor. "And just so we're absolutely clear about your place in this organization," Richard continued, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction, "you stay in economy class where you belong. The business class section is for actual professionals, not wannabe marketers who still wear discount store ties." The words hit me like a physical blow. I glanced down at my tie. It was from a department store and it had been on sale, but it was the nicest one I owned. My face burned with embarrassment as Richard's companions chuckled and shook their heads in mock sympathy. "Mr. Thompson?" Patricia's voice cut through the humiliation. I turned back to her, expecting more bad news, but her expression had changed. There was something almost mischievous in her eyes. "I have some information about your flight." "Oh, this should be good," Richard said from behind me. "What's the matter, Thompson? Overbooked in the cheap seats?" Patricia looked directly at me, ignoring Richard completely. "Mr. Thompson, it appears there's been a change to your reservation. Due to your platinum status with our rewards program and some availability in our premium cabin, we've upgraded your seat." I stared at her, confused. "Upgraded? But I don't have platinum status. There must be some mistake." She winked at me so quickly I almost missed it. "No mistake, sir. You're now confirmed in seat 2A. That's first class." The terminal seemed to go silent around me. Richard's laugh died in his throat. His 2 companions looked between him and me with expressions of shock and confusion. "First class," I whispered, barely believing what I was hearing. "That's correct, Mr. Thompson. Here's your new boarding pass." Patricia handed me the golden-colored boarding pass with a smile that could have powered the entire airport. "You'll be boarding with our premium passengers in about an hour. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" I took the boarding pass with trembling fingers, staring at the words, "First Class," printed clearly across the top. Behind me, Richard was sputtering incoherently. "There has to be some mistake," he said, pushing forward to the counter. "I'm Richard Morrison, CEO of Morrison & Associates. This is my employee. He's flying economy." Patricia's smile never wavered. "I'm sorry, sir, but Mr. Thompson's upgrade is confirmed and non-transferable. Is there something I can help you with regarding your own reservation?" I watched as Richard's face turned various shades of red. The 2 junior executives looked like they were witnessing the collapse of their entire worldview. Other passengers in line were now openly staring, some even pulling out their phones. "This is ridiculous," Richard blustered. "I demand to speak to your supervisor." "Of course, sir. She'll be with you shortly." Patricia pressed a button on her phone. "In the meantime, Mr. Thompson, please enjoy our premium lounge. It's just down the hall to your right." I stood there for a moment, still processing what had just happened. The humiliation of minutes before had transformed into something else entirely, not quite triumph, but a strange sense of vindication. I looked at Richard, whose face was now approaching purple, and felt something I had never experienced in 3 years of working for him: pity. "Thank you, Patricia," I said quietly. "I think I will check out that lounge." As I walked away from the counter, I could hear Richard still arguing with Patricia, his voice echoing embarrassingly through the terminal. Other passengers were giving him a wide berth, and I noticed several people recording him with their phones. The 2 junior executives had quietly disappeared, probably to get as far away from the scene as possible. The first-class lounge was everything I had imagined and more. Soft leather chairs, complimentary drinks, a buffet of gourmet food, and most importantly, silence. I settled into a chair by the window and watched planes take off and land, still clutching my golden boarding pass. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't thinking about Richard Morrison or his opinions of me. I was thinking about the presentation I had spent weeks preparing, the ideas I had developed, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this trip to Chicago would be the beginning of something new. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw what happened at the counter. You handled that with class. Looking forward to your presentation tomorrow. Janet Walsh, Midwest Industries." I stared at the message in disbelief. Janet Walsh was the client we were supposed to meet. She had been there. She had seen everything. As I sat in that first-class lounge, watching Richard continue his argument at the check-in counter through the window, I realized that sometimes the universe has a way of leveling the playing field. The question now was what I was going to do with this unexpected opportunity. The first-class cabin was a world I had only seen in movies. The seats were more like small bedrooms, with enough space to stretch out completely and personal TVs larger than the one in my studio apartment. As I settled into seat 2A, I tried to process everything that had happened in the last hour. The flight attendant, a kind woman named Carol, approached with a genuine smile. "Mr. Thompson? Welcome aboard. Can I get you a pre-flight beverage?" "Just water, please," I said, still feeling overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding me. "Of course. And might I say, congratulations on your upgrade." Patricia mentioned it was well-deserved. I looked at her curiously. She did. Carol leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Between you and me, we see a lot of difficult passengers. It's refreshing when someone handles a tough situation with grace." She paused. "Your boss made quite the impression back there." As if summoned by her words, Richard appeared at the front of the first-class cabin. He had somehow managed to get past the boarding gate, probably by throwing around his CEO title and demanding special treatment. His face was still flushed, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. "Thompson," he barked, causing several other first-class passengers to look up from their newspapers and tablets. "We need to talk. Now." Carol stepped between us smoothly. "I'm sorry, sir, but you'll need to return to your assigned seat. We're preparing for takeoff." "This is my employee," Richard said, pointing at me like I was evidence in a court case. "There's been some kind of mistake with his seating assignment." "No mistake, sir," Carol replied firmly. "Mr. Thompson's upgrade is confirmed. Now, if you don't return to your seat, I'll need to call security." The other first-class passengers were now fully engaged in the drama unfolding before them. I recognized a few faces, people who looked like business executives and entrepreneurs, the kind of people Richard usually tried to impress. They were watching him with a mixture of amusement and disgust. "This is outrageous." Richard's voice cracked with frustration. "I pay this airline thousands of dollars every year. And we appreciate your business, sir," Carol said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "But disrupting other passengers is grounds for removal from the flight." An older gentleman in seat 1D looked up from his Wall Street Journal. He was impeccably dressed, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. "Young man," he said to Richard in a calm but authoritative voice, "you're making a spectacle of yourself. I suggest you return to your seat before you make this situation worse." Richard looked around the cabin, finally seeming to realize that every eye was on him and none of them were sympathetic. His shoulders sagged slightly and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "This isn't over, Thompson," he muttered before turning and stalking back toward the economy section. The cabin returned to its previous quiet elegance, but I could feel the other passengers occasionally glancing in my direction. I pulled out my laptop and tried to focus on my presentation, but my mind kept racing. "Excuse me." The gentleman from 1D had approached my seat. Up close he looked even more distinguished. "I'm Walter Klein." I couldn't help but overhear the commotion earlier. "Nathan Thompson," I replied, standing to shake his hand. "I'm sorry about all that drama." Walter waved dismissively. "Nothing to apologize for. You handled yourself admirably. What line of work are you in, Nathan?" "Marketing. I work for Morrison and Associates." His eyebrows raised slightly. "Ah, working for the gentleman who just made a scene. That must be challenging." "Sometimes," I admitted, feeling like honesty was the best policy with this man. "I'm heading to Chicago myself." "Midwest Industries, are you familiar with them?" My heart skipped. "Actually, yes. We're pitching a campaign to them tomorrow." Walter smiled knowingly. "Small world. I'm on their board of directors." I felt the blood drain from my face. This was either the best thing that could have happened or the worst. Another board member had just witnessed my boss having a public meltdown. "Relax," Walter said, noting my expression. "Based on what I've seen so far, I have a feeling tomorrow's meeting is going to be very interesting." The rest of the flight passed in a blur. Walter and I talked about marketing trends, business philosophy, and life in general. He was nothing like the stuffy board member I had imagined. He was curious, insightful, and genuinely interested in my ideas about the Midwest Industries campaign. "You know," he said as we began our descent into Chicago, "I've been in business for 40 years and I've learned that character matters more than credentials. Today you showed character." As the plane taxied to the gate, I gathered my belongings with a mixture of excitement and terror. Tomorrow's presentation had suddenly become much more significant than I had ever imagined. In the economy section, I could see Richard gathering his things, his face still dark with anger. The two junior executives flanked him like bodyguards, probably hoping to avoid any more scenes. "Nathan," Walter said as we prepared to disembark, "a piece of advice. Tomorrow, don't present like an employee seeking approval. Present like a professional with something valuable to offer. There's a difference and it matters." As I walked through O'Hare Airport toward the baggage claim, my phone buzzed with several messages. The first was from my roommate back in Dallas. "Dude, you're viral. Someone posted a video of your boss freaking out at the airport. It's everywhere." My stomach dropped. I pulled up social media and searched for Richard's name. Sure enough, there were multiple videos from different angles showing his outburst at the check-in counter and later on the plane. The comments were brutal, and the videos had been shared thousands of times. The second message was from Janet Walsh again. "Looking forward to tomorrow's meeting. Heard you made quite an impression on Walter Klein during the flight. See you at 10 a.m. sharp." The third message was from an unknown number. "Mr. Thompson, this is Lisa Park from Business Insider. We'd like to interview you about the incident at DFW Airport today. Please call me at your earliest convenience." I stared at my phone in disbelief. In the span of 6 hours, my quiet, insignificant life had been turned upside down. The question was whether it was going to be for better or worse. As I waited for my luggage, I noticed Richard at the other end of the carousel, still surrounded by his entourage but looking significantly less confident than usual. When he saw me watching, he quickly looked away. For 3 years, I had been afraid of Richard Morrison. Afraid of his criticism, his mood swings, his power to make or break my career. But standing there in Chicago O'Hare, watching him try to avoid eye contact, I realized that fear had been replaced by something else entirely: determination. Tomorrow's presentation wasn't just about landing a client anymore. It was about proving to myself, to Richard, and to everyone who had ever underestimated me that talent and hard work matter more than titles and intimidation. I grabbed my suitcase and headed toward the taxi stand, ready to face whatever came next. I barely slept that night in my modest hotel room, reviewing my presentation over and over until the words blurred together on my laptop screen. Room service coffee at 5 a.m., a shower that ran cold halfway through, and a suit that I had pressed 3 times to get the wrinkles out. By 9 a.m., I was standing outside the gleaming headquarters of Midwest Industries, watching Richard pace back and forth in the lobby through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He had clearly seen the videos. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since we arrived at the hotel last night, and his usual cocky demeanor had been replaced by something I had never seen before: genuine worry. The two junior executives looked like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I took a deep breath and walked through the revolving door. "Thompson." Richard's voice cracked like a whip across the marble lobby. "We need to establish some ground rules before we go upstairs." "Good morning, Richard," I replied calmly, which seemed to irritate him further. This presentation is mine. You're here to observe and learn. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not offer opinions. Do not embarrass me or this company any more than you already have. The irony of his last statement wasn't lost on me, considering he was the one who had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone and showing him Janet Walsh's text. Ms. Walsh specifically requested that I present the campaign. It seems she was impressed by our conversation yesterday. Richard's face went through several color changes as he read the message. You talked to the client without authorization? She texted me first. Before Richard could respond, the elevator doors opened and Janet Walsh stepped out. She was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 40s, with short auburn hair and the kind of confident stride that comes with genuine authority. She was accompanied by Walter Klein and two other executives I didn't recognize. Mr. Thompson. Janet approached with a warm smile and extended her hand. So nice to finally meet you in person. The pleasure is mine, Ms. Walsh. Thank you for this opportunity. Please call me Janet. She turned to Richard with a noticeably cooler expression. Mr. Morrison. I trust your flight was eventful? Richard's jaw tightened. There were some minor complications, but nothing that affected our preparation for today's presentation. Walter Klein stepped forward, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Nathan, good to see you again. Ready for your big day? The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was tense and silent. Richard kept shooting me warning glances, while Janet and Walter made small talk about Chicago weather. The two junior executives looked like they were attending their own funeral. The conference room was stunning glass walls overlooking Lake Michigan, a massive mahogany table and state-of-the-art presentation equipment. As we settled into our seats, I noticed that Janet had positioned herself directly across from me, not Richard. Before we begin, Janet announced, I want to address the elephant in the room. I'm sure you're all aware that yesterday's airport incident has gained some attention on social media. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ms. Walsh, I can assure you that was an isolated incident that in no way reflects. Actually, Janet interrupted, it reflects quite a lot. Walter filled me in on the details from the flight, and frankly, Mr. Morrison, your behavior was unprofessional and concerning. The room fell silent. Richard's face was turning that familiar shade of red, but for once, he seemed speechless. However, Janet continued, Nathan's composure and professionalism in a difficult situation made a strong impression on both Walter and myself. Which is why we've decided to hear his presentation first. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. 3 years of working in Richard's shadow, of being dismissed and undermined, had led to this moment. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the projection system. Thank you for this opportunity. What I'm about to show you isn't just a marketing campaign, it's a complete brand transformation strategy for Midwest industries. For the next 45 minutes, I presented every idea I had been developing for months. I talked about demographic shifts, digital integration, customer journey mapping, and authentic brand storytelling. I showed them mock-ups of advertisements that didn't just sell products but told stories that connected with real people's lives. As I spoke, I watched Janet's expression change from polite attention to genuine interest to excited engagement. Walter was taking notes and nodding approvingly. Even the other two executives were leaning forward in their chairs. The key insight, I continued, is that your customers aren't just buying industrial equipment. They're investing in their businesses' futures, their employees' livelihoods, their community's economic stability. Our campaign needs to speak to those deeper motivations. I clicked to my final slide, which showed a comprehensive 12-month implementation timeline with projected results. Questions? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Janet was the first to speak. Nathan, this is remarkable. You've identified market opportunities we hadn't even considered. The emotional resonance strategy is particularly brilliant. Walter nodded in agreement. In 40 years of business, I've seen a lot of presentations. This one stands out. Richard, who had been silent throughout my presentation, finally spoke up. Of course, Nathan's ideas are based on the strategic framework I developed for this campaign. He's been working under my direct supervision. Actually, I interrupted, something I had never done before in my life. These are my original concepts. I've been developing them for months, primarily during my own time. The room went quiet again. Richard's face was now approaching that dangerous purple shade I had seen at the airport. That's ridiculous, he sputtered. Everything an employee creates belongs to the company. I am the creative director. Mr. Morrison, Janet's voice cut through his bluster like ice. Are you claiming credit for Nathan's work? I'm claiming responsibility for everything my team produces. Walter leaned forward. Then perhaps you'd like to present your version of the campaign? Show us how your strategic framework differs from what Nathan just presented. It was a trap and everyone in the room knew it. Richard hadn't worked on the presentation at all. He had been too busy dismissing it as unimportant, delegating it to me so he could focus on what he considered more pressing matters. The presentation Nathan just gave was exactly what I had envisioned, Richard said weakly. I see. Janet's tone was arctic. So you're saying you envisioned a presentation that you then made no effort to prepare or contribute to? The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, Janet turned back to me. Nathan, we'd like to move forward with your campaign. However, we have some concerns about the management structure at Morrison & Associates. Richard's face went white. What does that mean? It means, Walter said calmly, that we want to work with Nathan directly. We'll need assurance that he has the authority and support to implement this strategy without interference. I felt like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. This couldn't be happening to me. That's not how our company operates, Richard said desperately. I'm the CEO. All client relationships go through me. Janet and Walter exchanged a look. Then Janet reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Nathan, would you be interested in discussing a different kind of arrangement? We've been looking for a marketing director for our internal team. Based on what we've seen today and what we observed yesterday, we think you might be exactly what we're looking for. The folder hit the table with a soft thud that sounded like thunder in my ears. Richard's mouth fell open. The two junior executives looked like they were witnessing a miracle. The position comes with a substantial salary increase, full benefits, equity participation, and most importantly, creative autonomy. You'd be working directly with our executive team to develop marketing strategies for all our divisions. I stared at the folder, my mind reeling. I need to think about this. Of course, Janet said. Take all the time you need. But know that the offer stands regardless of what happens with Morrison & Associates. As we gathered our things to leave, Richard pulled me aside. His arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. Thompson, you can't seriously be considering this. You owe me. I gave you your start in this business. I looked at him for a long moment, thinking about all the times he had belittled me, dismissed my ideas, and tried to keep me in what he considered my place. You're right, Richard. You did give me my start. And for that I'm grateful. But what happened today wasn't about loyalty or gratitude. It was about recognizing talent and treating people with respect. I picked up the folder from the table and headed toward the elevator, leaving Richard standing alone in the conference room overlooking Lake Michigan. As the elevator descended, I realized that my life had just changed completely. The question was whether I had the courage to embrace that change. 3 days later, I was sitting in a coffee shop near my apartment in Dallas, staring at the contract from Midwest Industries spread across the small wooden table. The numbers were almost surreal: a 70% salary increase, full health and dental coverage, stock options, and a signing bonus that was more than I had made in my entire first year at Morrison & Associates. My phone had been ringing nonstop since we returned from Chicago. The airport incident had spawned dozens of articles about workplace harassment and corporate culture. Someone had even started a hashtag #StayInEconomy. The videos had been viewed millions of times, and my LinkedIn profile had exploded with connection requests from recruiters, journalists, and people sharing their own workplace horror stories. Richard had called me 17 times in the past 2 days. I hadn't answered any of them. The coffee shop door chimed, and my roommate Mike slid into the seat across from me, carrying 2 steaming cups. Extra shot, no sugar, just like your soul, he said, pushing 1 cup toward me. So, have you decided? I think so, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Dude, what's there to think about? Your boss publicly humiliated you, tried to steal credit for your work, and has been treating you like garbage for 3 years. Meanwhile, this company is offering you more money, respect, and the chance to actually use your brain. It's not exactly a difficult choice. Mike was right, of course. But something was holding me back and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I guess I'm scared, I admitted. What if I'm not ready? What if I fail? At Morrison & Associates, I know what to expect. Even if it sucks, it's familiar. Mike nearly choked on his coffee. Nathan, listen to yourself. You just single-handedly landed the biggest client presentation of your career, impressed a board of directors, and got offered your dream job. If that doesn't prove you're ready, what will? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Carol, the flight attendant from your DFW Chicago flight. Just wanted you to know that your situation inspired our crew to start a fund for employees facing workplace harassment. You made a difference. Hope Chicago works out for you. I showed Mike the message and he smiled. See? You're already making an impact and you haven't even started yet. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk through downtown Dallas to clear my head. The city was bustling with its usual energy, but everything felt different now. Street vendors called out their daily specials, construction workers shouted instructions over the noise of machinery, and business people hurried past with their phones pressed to their ears. This had been my world for 3 years, but it already felt like I was seeing it from the outside. I found myself standing in front of the Morrison & Associates building, looking up at the gleaming tower where I had spent so many miserable hours. Through the lobby windows, I could see the security guard who always greeted me with a friendly nod, the receptionist who remembered my coffee order, the cleaning lady who worked late shifts and always asked about my weekend plans. These people had become part of my daily routine. If I left, I would probably never see them again. My phone rang. This time it wasn't Richard. It was Janet Walsh. Nathan, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Not at all. How can I help you? Actually, I was calling to help you. Walter mentioned that you seemed conflicted about our offer during our follow-up call yesterday. I wanted to address any concerns you might have. I found a bench in a nearby park and sat down. I appreciate the offer, Janet. Really. It's more than I ever imagined possible. I guess I'm just wondering if I'm making the right decision for the right reasons. What do you mean? I don't want to leave Morrison & Associates just because I'm angry or hurt. I want to make sure I'm moving towards something positive, not just running away from something negative. Janet was quiet for a moment. Nathan, can I tell you something about my career? I've been working for 20 years and I've made 3 major job changes. Each time, people told me I was making a mistake. Too risky, too soon, too uncertain. But every single time, those moves led to the best opportunities of my life. She paused and I could hear the sounds of a busy office in the background. The difference between running away and moving forward isn't about the circumstances that prompt the change. It's about what you do once you get there. Based on everything I've seen from you, I have no doubt you'll thrive in this position. But more importantly, I think you'll find fulfillment in work that challenges and respects you. After we hung up, I sat on that bench for another hour watching people go about their daily lives. Families playing with their children, couples walking hand in hand, elderly men feeding pigeons and sharing stories about the good old days. Life was happening all around me, and I realized that I had been putting mine on hold for 3 years, waiting for Richard to give me permission to succeed. That evening, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Richard. He answered on the first ring. Thompson. Finally. Listen, I've been thinking about what happened in Chicago and I think we can work something out. Maybe it's time for a promotion, a raise, more responsibility. Richard, I interrupted, I'm calling to give you my 2 weeks' notice. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long I thought he might have hung up. You can't be serious, he finally said. After everything I've done for you? This is how you repay me. This isn't about payback, Richard. It's about moving forward with my career. You'll regret this, Thompson. I guarantee it. You think these big companies care about you? You're just a number to them. At least here you're family. I almost laughed. If this is how you treat family, I'd rather be a number. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the Midwest Industries contract. Then I picked up my pen and signed on the dotted line. The second phone call was to Janet Walsh. I accept, I said simply. Excellent. We're thrilled to have you on the team. When can you start? 2 weeks from Monday. Perfect. Nathan, I want you to know that we're not just hiring you because of your presentation, impressive as it was. We're hiring you because of your character. That's something you can't teach and it's something we value highly here. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, excitement about going to work. The next 2 weeks at Morrison & Associates were surreal. Word had spread quickly through the office about my resignation and new job. Some colleagues were genuinely happy for me and congratulated me on my success. Others seemed resentful, as if my leaving somehow reflected poorly on their decision to stay. Richard oscillated between trying to convince me to stay and making passive-aggressive comments about loyalty and gratitude. The junior executives who had witnessed the airport incident treated me with a newfound respect that was both gratifying and sad. Sad because it had taken public humiliation of their boss for them to see me as an equal. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk and said goodbye to the security guard, the receptionist, and the cleaning lady. They wished me well and promised to keep in touch, though we all knew that probably wouldn't happen. As I walked out of the Morrison & Associates building for the last time, carrying my personal items in a cardboard box, I felt a strange mixture of relief, sadness, and anticipation. This had been my professional home for 3 years, for better and worse. But it was time to find out what I was capable of when I wasn't being held back by fear and other people's limitations. 6 months later, I was standing in another conference room, this one in Midwest Industries' newly renovated marketing department. The walls were covered with campaign mock-ups, strategy charts, and photos from our latest product launches. My team of 5 talented professionals was gathered around the table, presenting their ideas for our next major initiative. "Nathan," said Jennifer, our digital marketing specialist, "the engagement numbers from the Emotional Resonance campaign are off the charts. We've exceeded projections by 40% in just the first quarter." I smiled, looking around at the faces of people who treated me as a colleague and leader, not as someone to be tolerated or dismissed. "That's fantastic work, everyone. What's our next move?" As we discussed strategy and timelines, I thought about the chain of events that had brought me here. A humiliating moment at an airport check-in counter had become the catalyst for the best professional decision of my life. Richard Morrison's attempt to put me in my place had ultimately freed me from a place where I never belonged. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Patricia, the airline representative who had upgraded my seat that day at DFW Airport. "Saw the article about your promotion in Business Weekly. Congratulations. Sometimes the universe knows exactly what it's doing." I laughed out loud, causing my team to look at me curiously. "Good news?" Jennifer asked. "The best kind," I replied. "The kind that reminds you that every ending is also a beginning." As we wrapped up our meeting and headed back to our respective offices, I reflected on the lesson I had learned over the past 6 months. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you respond to that treatment and what you choose to do with your talents and opportunities. Richard Morrison had tried to keep me in economy class, both literally and metaphorically. But sometimes, when you handle adversity with grace and refuse to let others define your value, life has a way of upgrading you to exactly where you belong. And sometimes, first class isn't just about the seat you're sitting in. It's about the respect you command, the work you do, and the person you choose to become when no one is trying to hold you back. 6 months after that humiliating day at the airport, I finally understood what Janet Walsh had meant about character being something you can't teach. It's something you discover, often in the most unexpected moments, when you're forced to choose between accepting someone else's limitations or writing your own story. I chose to write my own story. And it turned out to be a bestseller.